Hello, hello, good evening. Welcome in, everyone. Genevieve, welcome in. It's so good to see you. So, tonight, if the interwebs lets us, because it's been storming and raining like crazy outside, but we're gonna do it to it as long as it lets us. We're gonna intend. Oh, hey, bring little reminder there for my computer. Okay, so chapter 19, which is where we're starting tonight, is entitled The Temple Ancestor. The chapters from the history of the mythical temples would not be engraved on the walls of the temple at Edfu if the Egyptians did not believe that their mythical lifetime had a direct bearing on the existence of the actual temple and that they were the starting point in the existence of the latter. It is not improbable that the Edfu tradition claimed a relationship between the mythical temple in Wetchesett-Neder, the solar temples, and the physically real temple of Horus the Betatite at Edfu. If this suggestion be admissible, the cosmogonical records will disclose the picture of what can reasonably be described as the mythical past of the temple at Edfu. These texts would seem to yield the events and causes from which the Egyptians believed that the house of the god on the earth derived, and which formed its characteristics. That way, welcome in. Good to see you, dude. Happy Wednesday. Happy Woden's Day. The idea of a relationship between the historical temples and the sacred places of a mythical nature is, in fact, well known. Frequent are the instances in temple inscriptions in which the historical temple is equated with the seat of the first occasion. None of the texts known, however, explains the significance of this vague expression, the nature of this seat of the first occasion. Nowhere is there any description of the origin and the development of the sacred entity on which the Egyptians looked as on the seat of the god in the primeval age. Doubtless, the Edfu documentary sources are unique evidence to illustrate the Egyptian conception of the seat of the first occasion. They exemplify in great detail the idea of the mythical entity from which the actual temple took origin, and make it clear that the Egyptians believed that their temples developed from the abstract to the concrete. The history of the mythical temples recorded in the sacred book known as the Specification of the Sacred Mounds of the Early Primeval Age seems to constitute the first phase in the life of the historical temple and is an integral part of its existence. The Egyptian idea seems to have been that the temple, in its physical existence, oh balls. I'll just start that sentence again. I dropped to one bar. The Egyptian idea seems to have been that the temple, in its physical existence, made concrete what had happened and what had existed before the dawn of history. In its foundation and building, the temple revives the memorial built for the Ka in the mythical age. It imitates the house which was erected to protect the embodiment of the soul of the creator. The actual temple would seem to give a repeated continuity to the material form of the son of the earth, SON. In brief, the cosmogonical records seem to allude, in the first place, to the belief in the continued rebirth of a sacred entity which, after a certain period of life, had disappeared, but was reborn in a new entity. This one bears the characteristics of its antecedent and reaches a further development. The mythical temple had its ancestor in the earth god, described as the DFN-ancestor. He made from the outcome of the creation of the earth the temple as the house of the god. In the same way, the mythical temple, as the work of the creator god, seems to assume the function of the temple ancestor of the real temple built as the house of the god of the earth. The close link of the Edfu temple with mythical cult place is borne out by several sets of records which constitute a coherent series of documents. The Egyptians might regard them as records of the mythical history of the temple. A list of these accounts was already given in the introduction to this study. Having analyzed the cosmogonical texts, we must return to a number of these inscriptions, which may be of special interest for the purpose of our study. My cat wants some attention. Let me fix this up for her. Little bug, you want to come up here? All right, it's ready for you. Okay. The best evidence of the belief in the temple ancestor is furnished by the summaries of mythological narratives that were incorporated in the building texts, which describe the history of the actual temple at Edfu. This temple is for the falcon Horus, the seat of the primeval time, to which his statue was carried during the ceremonies of the handing over the house to its lord. The temple is the place where the god spends the day and sleeps during the night, and his dwelling place is in its essential nature, the blessed place of the soul, which came into being at the beginning. Boom! The foundation ground of the actual temple is conceived as that deriving from the primeval time upon which the builder gods constructed the house of the god under the supervision of Ptah. It is appropriate to recall the ritual scene in which Thoth is depicted as offering a charter to Horus the Betatite. We suggested in the introduction that this scene implies that the cosmogonical records which follow have a direct bearing on the history of the actual temple at Edfu. Having discussed the contents of the cosmogonical records, we can hardly doubt that this divine charter meant the sacred book in which the history of the mythical temples was recorded. Evidently, the Edfu temple claims for itself the honor that Thoth recorded the mythical past of this temple. The Egyptians might have believed that Thoth revealed to their chief god what his original house was, which his final house should resemble. But far more can be deduced from this simple ritual scene. There is brief but undeniable evidence of the belief in a direct continuity and relationship between a mythical temple which had once existed and had disappeared, and the historical temple. We know what was, according to the tradition, the culminating act of the mythical reign of Tannin, the creation of the temple in Wetchesset-Neter. This temple was believed to have determined the origin of the temple of Horus at Edfu. This scene manifests the belief that the sacred entity which began its existence in the reign of Tannin continues to live in the actual temple. The mythical temple in Wetchesset-Neter is then revivified and is actually embodied in the existence of the temple of Horus the Betatite at Edfu. The ritual scene which is added to the first cosmogonical record intimates the same belief. I gotta intimates, like an intimate? Intimates. I'm looking it up. Get a better idea. Every time I've come across that word, I've sort of like struggled and paused. So let's check it out at the last reading. Intimates. A very close friend. Cool. Bosom friend, constant companion, alter ego, close friend, best friend. Marked by a warm friendship developing through long association. So close, right? Characterized by a close or warm personal relationship, deeply personal, private, or secret, euphemistic. Okay, cool. That helps. Therasia, good evening. Welcome in. Happy Wednesday. I bet this is too hot to drink, but I'm going to give it a try. Really steamy. I'm doing Moroccan mint tonight. Whew. I stopped it before it fully boiled even. Woo! It's delicious. Oh yeah, Moroccan mint and detox tea. Okay, I'm going to clear my throat. Uno momento. All right. Intimates. Where are we at on that? Uh-oh. Oh no. Intimates. Okay. The ritual scene, which is added to the first cosmogonical record, intimates the same belief. Okay, all right. It pictures a scene of adoration performed in Wetchesatnater, which was believed to enshrine the perch, the seat of the falcon in the primeval age. The god adored there was the sanctified god who came into being at the first occasion. This god, then, is in the Edfu tradition, the living god, Horus the Betite. These two instances seem to reveal what was the essential feature of the organization of the actual temple. The god of the historical temple was believed to be identical in his nature with the divine being who was sanctified at the first occasion, the primeval falcon, the lord of the Jeba, or the perch. Therefore, the place where the god was adored during historical times was conceived as being identical with the place where the falcon was sanctified in the primeval age of the gods and where he was acclaimed first as the god. This view is also illustrated by the building text of the pronaos. I can't remember what that means. Ooh, rooibos and cinnamon. That sounds so good. Oh my gosh, I have a bunch of rooibos. I forgot. Thanks for reminding me. Pronounce. Damn it. I gotta look out. I gotta look that up again, how to pronounce it. Pronaos. I knew I got it wrong. Pronaos. Thank you. Okay, this view is also illustrated by the building text of the Pronaos. The temple at Edfu is described as the great seat of Harakte, of which the true name is Jeba, since the gods of the Jeba, or perch, established it as the Jeba, or perch, of reeds, which is D-J-E-B-A. Jeba. I made the D silent. Further evidence of this theory can be found in the scene of adoration of the gods of the perch, who are the Shebtu of our creation story. The Jeba is defined as the seat of the first occasion of the falcon, and the mythical event of the planting the perch is projected into the situation of the actual temple at Edfu. This temple, so far as the Edfu tradition is concerned, includes and repeats the existence of the mythical domain on the edge of the primeval island, the Jeba in Wetchesatnater, the creation of which was believed to have revivified and resurrected the existence of the vanished world of the Creator. The Edfu texts furnish further useful material which makes it possible to reconstruct the mythological situation with which the Egyptians surrounded the foundation of the historical temple. We have already referred to the lists of mythical names, which are incorporated in the main building texts of the Edfu temple. We also suggested that they appear in many respects to be very brief summaries of various mythological narratives which described events which the Egyptians believed had a bearing on the history of their temple. These mythological names show a striking resemblance to what can be, excuse me, to what can be gleaned from the cosmogonical records. We suggest that these lists were written at Edfu with reference to the cosmogonical records. They had, most probably, the purpose for specifying what was believed to be the mythical prototype of the historical temple of Horus, and of describing briefly the characteristics of the ancestral temples which were believed to have determined the existence of the Edfu temple. The name lists in the main Edfu building texts differ markedly from the shorter lists to be found in each cult room or hall of the Edfu temple, and we do not doubt that they define the temple as a whole. It is worthy of note that in none of these lists is the Edfu temple referred to as the Temple of Horus the Betatite. Juicy. One second, I gotta check something real quick. I think I forgot to click this thing on over here. Boop, boop, save. Okay. Just some background stuffs. That's interesting. It's worthy of note that in none of these lists is the Edfu temple referred to as the Temple of Horus the Betatite. But I mean, Edfu temple is known as the Temple of Horus. Now, that's how it's known. We read in them names of the sacred places of the falcon in the primeval age, the names of the mythical temples of the sun god, and finally, names which summarize the events which were believed to have occurred in the far distant sacred domains and led to the foundation and that of the sun god. The list of names to be found in the building texts of the inner face of the enclosure wall presents us with a real summary of the myth about the origin of the domain and the Temple of the Falcon. The Temple of Horus at Edfu is interpreted as a place in which the god was believed to unite with his Sakhemu, 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 unite with his Sakhemu, and a place of such a nature was believed to be the first province of the falcon. In the following series of names, we find those already known from the first cosmogonical record, such as, quote, the blessed island of the child, the ancestral territory of the falcon, the place of the gods of the Didi pillar, since they were there from the primeval time, the mound of the radiant, the great mound of the heater her, the island of the fury, the place for piercing, the Jeba of the god of Jeba, the field of reed of the soul, the place of the winged one, the hill of the soul, the great seat of Re, and the eldest, end quote. Or wait, that was not and, it was the great seat of Re, the eldest, end quote. This document seems to aim at proving that the actual temple could exist only in a place which by its nature was identical with the spot of the primeval age in which the first resting place of the god was created. Places and time, places and energy. Therefore, it appears that the names of the far distant, mythical cultist places were regarded as the first means of proving the relationship and the continuity between what was and what exists. The Egyptian theory seems to have been that when the site of the actual temple was given names of the mythical sacred places, it then acquired the name of the former and could represent its continuation in the present days. The same idea is apparent from the names of the Edfu temple, which we find in the building text of the Naos, Naos, Naos. The Edfu temple is said to be, quote, the throne of gods, of the deities, of the primeval age of gods, the seat of the two gods, Re and his ancestor Tannin, the blessed homeland of their company of gods, and the mansion of Misnit, end quote. It is essential to mention here the name list of the building text of the outer face of the enclosure wall, which is the most expanded document of this sort. This long list confirms that the sets of mythological names of the historical temple were not deliberately compiled, but were rather abbreviated copies of mythological records kept in the temple. We pointed out in the introduction to this study that this list alludes to the sacred book of the temples, which was drawn up with reference to the historical temples according to a much earlier source. This then, it is highly probable, was the sacred book called the Specification of the Sacred Mounds of the Early Primeval Age. The comparison of these two sacred books, kept in one single temple, shows that the word GS-PRW, or temples, places the expression the sacred mounds of the early primeval age, or replaces. So let me try that again. The comparison of these two sacred books kept in one single temple shows that the word temples replaces the expression the sacred mounds of the early primeval age. The temples of historical Egypt are here equated with the sacred mound. If this equation be there is therefore an undeniable argument for the theory that the temples of historical times were regarded as descending from the genuine sacred places of the mythical age of the gods. In the part of the sacred book of the temples that survives on the wall of the Edfu temple, names such as Wecheset Neder, the Great Seat, Jeba, Bedet, Mesen, and the mansion of the God of the great God are stressed. Explanations of their meaning are added, and these explanations reflect the ideas contained in the main cosmogonical records, or summarize the events described in the principal sources. Several names included in this book appear to be artificial ones, formed with a view to summarizing various mythological events which were associated with the original cultist places of the Falcon. The contents of this name list make it clear that the record has every aspect of being a brief summary of the original sacred book of the Specification of the Sacred Mounds. It shows also that the myths and old traditions of the original cultist places were used and reused and applied to the sacred places of proto-historic and historic times. Finally, the same traditions were used to explain the origin of the last sacred place of the Falcon, the temple at Edfu. The evidence of the name seems to show how important was the mythical name in the history of the actual temple. The names seem to be the principal means that carries the original nature of a particular sacred place to another. We have seen that the first sacred place that was created when the new period of the primeval age dawned was made like its prototype that had vanished. We have also seen how important was the part played by the name in that process of creation. The first sacred enclosure created for the Falcon on the Payland bore the same name as the first sacred domain, and seems to have been regarded as the continuation of an earlier sacred domain. We have already pointed to the importance. I hope I'm back. I'm rocking one bar of connection right now. It's been in and out all day. So I'll start at the beginning of that sentence. We have already pointed to the importance of the mythological names when applied to the site of the temple. We think that with regard to the temple itself, we meet exactly the same situation. The mythological names, when used with special reference to the historical temple, seem to have every appearance of an outline explanation of what the temple was before it came to be a real and physical entity. These mythological names are, in fact, an epitome of the mythical past of the temple. I used to think that said epitome. And I said it out loud one time in front of like, I don't know, like 50 people. Like practice at like theater practice. I'll never forget. I felt so at least I learned, man. I felt so dumb. There was just like people were roaring. So yeah, that happened. Every time I see that word, I think of that moment. These mythological names are, in fact, the epitome of the mythical past of the temple. They specify the ancient sites from which the actual temple was believed to have descended, the nature of which is enshrined in the historical temple and thereby revivified. They determined that the temple ancestor was the pre existence of which ensured the creation of the historical temple. At this point, we come to the same conclusion as that suggested by the Edfu preamble to the cosmogonical records. These lists of mythological names are also evidence of the continuity between what was and what exists. That which had once existed ensures the origin, the life, and the prosperity of a new entity. There seem to be the same trends of thought as those already known from the mythological story. It is known that the mythical temple in Wecheset Neder resuscitated the existence of the home of the Ka. Here, the actual temple of Horus restores the mythical temple and, with it, the genuine cultist place in which the falcon was adored first. Also relevant are the inscriptions engraved on the cornice of the Pronaos. Yeah, okay. Also relevant, I'm starting that over. Also relevant are the inscriptions engraved on the cornice of the Pronaos and the naos of the Edfu temple. This set of short inscriptions is of value and interest. They contain definitions of the abstract nature of the historical temple, which show ideas closely related to those in the main Edfu cosmogonical records. The historical temple of Edfu is described as the temple of Re in his primeval age, bearing the name Mansion of Misnet, a name which was given to it by Tannin. It is explained that the creator, who is the earth maker, settled there and protects the sacred domains in his great mysterious form of the Betatite, and the Lord of the Wing safeguards his domain. Hey, they're showing some hieroglyphs again. Dude, I was looking at books. You can buy books that will teach you how to read hieroglyphs and hieroglyphics. Can you see it? Can I point it out? That means Earthmaker. The Eye of Horus. And someone kneeling. And then, I don't know, an outstretched arm or a snake or a squiggly. That the creator, who is the Earthmaker, so that means creator and Earthmaker, in his great mysterious form of the Betatite, and the Lord of the Wing safeguards his domain. Hey, welcome in. Good to see you, Michelle. The Ogbo. Welcome in. Awesome. I'm going to clear my throat in a momento. Boop. Okay. I love it when they show the hieroglyphs. The major idea put forth in this short text is that the site of the Edfu temple was believed to be, in its symbolical nature, similar to the foundation ground of the mythical solar temple, the mansion of Misnet, the origin of which is known from the Edfu cosmogonical records. This set of inscriptions proceeds to tell us that the Edfu site is the place of the soul, the place of the ancestor of the gods who protects his children, the great place of Re, the god's throne of the primeval time in which Hir protects the mansion of the god. It is also the mound of the horizon god, the resting place of the falcon, the sanctified ruler settled there while protecting the mansions of the gods within his great seat from the primeval time. The god, the DRTY falcon, protects the sanctuary of the god, the throne of the DRTY falcon, who protects the sanctuary of the DRTY falcons, and who uplifted himself over the gods. And the Hir again is said to exercise the protection of his mansion. Very little needs to be added to demonstrate the resemblance between the ideas enshrined in these short descriptions and those known from the main cosmogonical records. Since the idea of the protection in this connection is repeated on several occasions, it is evident that the sacred place, which was equivalent in its nature to the god's seat of the primeval time, was believed to be capable of ensuring the protection of the god in historical times. I love you, Michelle. Dude, what a you oh my you've been sending me okay, so the turtle, that was awesome. The turtle video. That video of the guitaring. Oh my goodness. That was so good. I got to send that to Corey. Thank you for sharing that with me. And your cheesy beautiful grin. So good. All right. The texts bearing on the foundation and the building of the temple at Edfu offer many decisive arguments to support the theory concerning the relationship as well as the idea of the temple ancestor, which was believed to have been revivified in the existence of the historical temple. It is opposite to recall a passage from the building text of the Naos, only briefly mentioned in the introduction. And then, okay, so opposite, APPOSITE. Let's refresh. We just looked that up last night or 2 days ago or something. Proneus, and Naeus. Okay. APP. It's like opposite and even sounds like opposite, but it's spelled with an A. Apt in the circumstances or in opposite. Okay. Okay. Yeah, dude. Oh my gosh. Right. That's a real video, isn't it? The Mr. Rogers video. Every time I see him, though, I have like mixed feelings. All right, let's try and do this again. Yeah, it was like sign language, right? A bunch of middle fingers. Okay, so opposite with an A. It is opposite to recall the passage from the building text of the Naeus, only briefly mentioned in the introduction. As has been said, this text is evidence that the foundation and the building of the historical temple was considered as being on par with the creation of the mythical temple in which the creator gods acted themselves. The text of this record reads, quote, Stretching the cord in Wetchesset Neder, laying out the foundation of the great seat of Harakte. The king himself, his hands were on the pole while grasping the cord together with Seishat in order to set it up according to the words of the god of the throne on the blessed land of his domain, in order to lay out its four corners, to found its WRMW, and there's a question mark, whatever that means, and to construct its sanctuaries according to the norm. He who is south of his enclosure had done it in the past. He had erected the four corners upon its four sides. Sechet, the great lucid, no, Sechet the great loosed the cord over it. Tek directed the rites, or conducted that which should be done or performed. And the builder god set firmly its four sides. The Ogdoad rejoiced while marching around them. The sages sanctified his sacred substances. He who is in Khenmu, Khenmu, increased its renown, or made great its matters. It is the Ka who gives thanks for it forever and ever, the primeval age. It is Tannin who established it while enshrining its lord. End quote. Juicy. In addition, a ritual scene bearing on the constructing of the temple, which is to be found on the outer face of the enclosure wall, reflects the same mythological situation. The ritual text reads, quote, "Thy temple is thine, having been constructed perfectly in the work of Ba-Neb-Hit. Thy majesty, to issue command in respect of it, Re, the eldest, having illumined the two lands, Tek and Seshat, the great, stretched the cord. The builder gods constructed the sanctuary together. The sages were together with them, and made its foundation ground greater than that in all the gnomes." Nomes. End quote. Three other records can be mentioned which show obvious affinities with the idea that the origin of the actual temple was conceived as that of a mythical entity and consequently projected into the mythical age of the gods. As a ritual episode of stretching of the cord, engraved on the inner face of the enclosure wall, Thoth is represented as having at the foundation ground of the temple while reciting, quote, "I came here in my true form upon the foundation ground of the great seat of Harakte. I cause its long dimension to be good, its breadth, 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 to be exact, all its measurements to be according to the norm, all its sanctuaries to be in the place where they should be, and its halls to resemble the sky." End quote. Seshat is said to be here, or Seshat is said to be there with Isden, while speeding the fashioning and the embellishment of the sanctuaries of the Mansion of the Victory. In the record incorporated in the cosmogonical texts, the origin of the historical temple is described as being the foundation of the great seat of Re of the primeval time. The builder gods are said to have come in haste, quote, "to the great seat of Re from the primeval time, his eye expectant at their arrival. They constructed the Messen in a blessed operation as the work of their skillful fingers upon the great foundation ground which Sefik Abwi had made, and Isden had drawn by his fingers at the command of Re and Tannin, the company of the early primeval deities, being in their train while praising Re, who created the Ka at the first occasion, forever and ever." End quote. It closely related, in closely related terms, the foundation of the temple of Horus, the Betatite, is described in another ritual episode of stretching the cord over the temple. The temple is said to have been planned in Wetchesset Neder. It was conceived as the laying out of the foundation ground of the great seat of Harakte. Thoth is said to have specified the foundation ground of the great seat of Re on the blessed territory of his domain, and to have given the dimensions of the temple and the enclosure. An additional record describing the builder gods tells us about the, quote, arriving at the great seat in the presence of their father Tannin and his grandson Horus, the son of their brethren. They issued command to their majesties to construct the temple in order to alight therein. They placed the cubit of Tek on their arms. Seshat, the sages, were together with them all. Stretching the cord by Seshat, Reksu was sanctified, and that's spelled Rekh-SW. Reksu was sanctified. These builder gods established the four sides of their enclosure, even the enclosure of 300 by 400 cubits. Speedy of fashioning, men call its name. A sanctuary was therein, great seat is its name, and all its sanctuaries are according to the norm, end quote. Esoteric Alchemistic, welcome in. Happy Wednesday, dude. Good to see you. The link between the actual temple of Horus the Betatite and the mythical temple of the sun god, the Great Seat, that can be deduced from the text of the ritual scenes at the Edfu temple, shows that the Edfu temple was regarded as the renewal, the restoration of the mythical Great Seat of Re from the primeval times. This brings to mind the belief that Thoth recorded the ground plans of the Great Seat in the presence of Re, at the dictate of the sages. The Egyptians seem to have believed that the ground plans of the historical temples were established according to what the sages of the primeval age revealed to Thoth. This belief recalls the episode of the magnifying the substances, or rather of magnifying the substances, which the sages were believed to perform before the foundation of the mythical temples was laid out. The foundation and building of the temple, considered from this point of view, seems to repeat and renew the act in which the creation of this world culminated. The views and descriptions contained in the mythological records of the historical temple are only an expanded version of what is very briefly indicated in the ritual scene which introduces us to the set of cosmogonical records to which we have referred on several occasions. The resemblance between these accounts and the cosmogonical records is striking. While using and adapting these records, the Edfu tradition evidently claims that the Edfu temple is the veritable descendant of the mythical temple that was created at the dawn of this world, that it is its true projection and reflection, and that it preserves its genuine nature and all its characteristics. Consequently, the Edfu temple was founded by the order of Tannin and Re, and was founded on the land which, by its nature, was equal to the primeval territory of the domain of the sun god. The foundation ground of the temple at Edfu was the blessed territory of the god of the throne, the foundation ground of the beginning, the blessed territory from the time of the primeval ones, the field of the Wetcheset Neter, the hinterland of the primeval water. Nevertheless, these texts present the idea that the site of the Edfu temple is equivalent to that of the solar temple. It is therefore reasonable to conclude that the foundation ground of the historical temple at Edfu was Hey, I'm back. Yay. Mary wins. Oh my gosh. Welcome in. Yeah, it's raining pretty hard out there. And I've had some crazy connection all day. So let's see here. I'm going to read that whole So the foundation ground of the temple at Edfu was the blessed territory of the god of the throne, the foundation ground of the beginning, the blessed territory from the time of the primeval ones, the field of the Wetcheset Neter, the hinterland of the primeval water. Nevertheless, these texts present the idea that the site of the Edfu temple is equivalent to that of the solar temple. It is therefore reasonable to conclude that the foundation ground of the historical temple at Edfu was conceived as being equivalent in its abstract meaning to the original BWTITI, the place for crushing, of the mythical temple of the sun god. All these views find their conclusion in the statement frequently occurring in the main building texts that the historical temple was founded in the place in which it should be, even as the ancestors first did in respect of it. On a foundation ground of such a nature and tradition was the building of the temple effected by the dictate of Ptah. Unlike the evidence of the main cosmogonical records, Ptah is said to be the first divine power to create the first mansion of the god and to supervise the building of the temple complex. This shows that the Edfu tradition is not based on the original version of the myth about the temple in Wetchesset Neder, but refers to the tradition in which, under the influence of local beliefs, Ptah replaced the god of the temple. It can therefore be assumed that the Edfu tradition renews the Memphite tradition of the myth about the origin of the first temple. If this be correct, there will be further corroborative evidence for the statements already expressed above. The Edfu texts bearing on the abstract aspect of the foundation and building of the temple set out clearly that the early sacred buildings at Memphis were most probably made on the pattern of the prehistoric constructions in the region to the north of Memphis, which the tradition looked upon as the starting point in the history of the actual temples. Memphis would seem to have adopted not only the bare pattern of the construction, but also the divine beings who were believed to be engaged in the creation of the temple, and with it also the rites and traditions connected with the constructing of the chief god of the historical Memphis was superimposed on all the orders of creation. Although the mythical situation connected with the origin of the temple at Edfu shows a tradition strongly affected by the interpretation of a later date, it retains one of the essential thoughts of the original myth. The historical temple was believed to have been built as the memorial for the Ka of the earth. Another point of similarity to the mythical abode of the gods can be seen in the part played by the earth god of the building of the historical temple. Tannin is said to have conducted the lord of the temple in it at the first, or let's try that sentence again. Excuse me. Tannin is said to have conducted the lord of the temple in it at the first, mother of pearls, third time's a charm. Tannin is said to have conducted the lord of the temple in it at the festival of handing over the temple to its lord. This brings to mind the final episodes of the creation of the mythical temples. Tannin, as the ancestor of the temple, brought to life the mythical temple. He is therefore the ancestor of any temple which derived its existence from the abode at the beginning of the world, and as ancestor, he was believed to bring to life any historical temple. This mythological situation that was believed to have surrounded the origin of the historical temple can hardly be a local Edfu tradition. It may apply to almost any temple, and any temple in Egypt might have had in its possession such a set of records as are known from the Edfu temple, only adapted to suit local beliefs and traditions. The sacred book of the temples is a clear indication. It is therefore highly probable that in the Edfu records we have extensive evidence of a general theory applying to the essential condition of an Egyptian temple. The Edfu temple was that of the falcon Horus, who was regarded as the primeval falcon, and as the sanctified god of the first occasion, who succeeded the earth god. This temple was believed to have been founded in a place where the earthmaker dwelt. Moreover, The Edfu temple enshrines the tradition that this temple was founded in the same place as that of the secondary mansions of the Falcon, which became later on the first solar temple. Dude. Dustin, awesome. I didn't see you. Welcome in. Welcome, everybody. Happy Wednesday. The temple was, in essence, the house of the successor of the Creator. It was also the home of all the divine powers who acted in the creation of the first temple. It is of interest to refer to the building text of the Pronaos of the Edfu temple, in which the divine inhabitants of the temple are listed. Side by side with the falcon Horus and Tannin, the ancestor of the temple dwelt at Edfu, and with him all the companies of deities who were engaged in the creation of the mythical temples, Isden and Seshet, the sages, the Shebtu, the builder gods, then the sun god with his 7 souls and 14 Kas. 14. It is therefore clear that the mythical temple of Misnet, which was last to be created and was made to house all the creative deities, found its renewal in the existence of the temple at Edfu. This belief offers decisive evidence to confirm the theory that the Egyptian temples were constructed on the basis of the old Memphite traditions. That Egyptian god who was chopped into 14 pieces, which then links to the Vitruvian man, which is also separated into 14 pieces. 14 for 5 for change, the balancing point. Osiris, right? Interesting. "14 Kas. So 7 souls and 14 Kas. 7 auspicious dudes." So, so this belief offers decisive evidence to confirm the theory that the Egyptian temples were constructed on the basis of the old Memphite traditions. The existence of the historical temple, therefore, was based on the principle of the reanimating of a pre-existing entity, specifically on the restoration of the temple. No! Okay, I came back, I think, right away. I'll take a sip and then I'll start that sentence again. Oh my goodness, it's a perfect drinking temp now. I love it when you say that to Michelle. My belle. It's so endearing. It makes my heart grow. Michelle, my belle. Bum 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 bum. My Michelle. I love you, I love you, I love you. So that's like wasn't it first a Beatles song, right? Wasn't it? Well, one of my favorite bands, Rebel Bucket, they do what I just sang. They do that song that I just sang. Oh, hey. Anyhow, that's also what goes through my head when you adorn Michelle. Your bell. The Egyptians seem to have regarded the ancestor pictured here as a mythical entity that bore the same name as the historical temple, and as the only means that provided the magical force that enabled the temple to come into existence. This magical force is defined as a kind of protection, We have seen this belief in the protection ensured by a power of ancestral nature from the very beginning of the history of the temple. It was believed to started at the moment when the first sacred domain of the god was created on the edges of the primeval island. From this very moment, as far as the foundation and building, we can follow in a direct line the belief that only the ancestor or ancestors provide the fitting circumstances for the creation of a new entity. I have to read that again. I didn't understand what I just read. From this very moment, as far as the foundation and building, we can follow in a direct line the belief that only the ancestor or ancestors provide the fitting circumstances for the creation of a new entity. Okay. This suggestion may perhaps add to the explanation of the significance of the relief in which Thoth is represented offering the sacred book to Horus the Bettite, a scene which has already been recalled. Thoth was believed to offer to the god the record of the past, which was regarded as the essential element that ensured the life and the prosperity of the temple. A further deduction that can be made from this belief bears on the presence of the cosmogonical texts in the temple. Their presence in the temple, especially their being engraved on the walls, might have been regarded as one of the means that ensured the magical protection of the historical temple. This circumstance brings to mind the belief in the becoming imminent, to which we have already referred while discussing the abstract nature of the mythical temple. If we recall the ceremony of the opening of the mouth in Wetchesed, it appears that the conception which we meet with regard to the sculptures and statues on the walls of the temple is projected in our myth into a mythological plane and is here transferred into the life of the temple. When we project this episode, which was performed on behalf of the statue to imbue it with life, into the situation of the temple, the idea eventually was that through the due performance of this rite, the temple as an entity and as an edifice was enabled to become alive. In this manner, the Wetchesed at the beginning of the world was reanimated in its existence. The ritual of the opening of the mouth performed on behalf of the temple was the revivification of the magical power that resided in the abstract temple concept, the ancestor of the temple, and thereby the mysterious life of the original house of the god was infused into the actual temple. The magic power that was believed to have resided in the texts bearing on the mythical past of the temple imparted to it the mysterious life of the original sacred entity. Boom! That was chapter 19. Almost an hour. We're going to continue, though. We're going to finish this book out tonight. I'm going to clear my throat, and I'll be right back for chapter 20. All right. Chapter 20. The appearance of the temple at Edfu. We have seen that the Egyptians believed that the constitution of the historical temple was determined by a pre-existing entity of a mythical nature to which the historical temple was equivalent in its significance. The temple is, in a strict sense, the concretizing of its ancestor. It would be legitimate to inquire how far the belief in the symbolic relationship with the temple ancestor could have a bearing on the physical appearance of the historical temple. The Edfu building texts disclose the tradition that the historical temple was constructed according to the words of the creator. Construction, the temple was the work of the ancestors. On another occasion, Horus the Bettite is described as saying, quote, "They found my house as the work of antiquity, and my sanctuary as the work of the ancestors. End quote. The same document indicates that the Ataton, which is Adyton, the Ataton of the historical temple at Edfu, was regarded as the god's genuine great seat of the first occasion. Uh-oh. It's buffering. That means poor connection. Reload. Oh no. Son of a gun. Can you guys still hear me? One bar. Fine. I'm gonna... God sleeps in the rock, dreams in the plant, stirs in the animal, and awakens in man. I want to keep that. Okay. Ataton. Right? Ataton. The Ataton of the historical temple at Edfu was regarded as the god's genuine great seat of the first occasion. Ataton. Definition. Damn, Bean. It's not letting me. Okay, I'm good here. Okay, well, Emoji King, awesome. Welcome in, dude. Well, I don't know what Ataton means, and I'm the interwebs isn't letting me look, so I'm just gonna keep on keeping on. The Edfu texts tell us also of ancient books and writings which apparently were used for the constitution of the plans of the historical temple at Edfu. Much explicit information is given by the building text of the inner face of the enclosure wall. It is stated that the enclosing wall of the throne of the Betatite that surrounds the great seat in Upper Egypt is like unto the enclosure of his great mansion in Lower Egypt. The same text also reveals that the king, in constructing the forecourt with the pylon, quote, made the protection around them in the form of this enclosure at the four sides of all of them, even the four-sided building, according to that which is written in the book for planning of the temple, which the chief lector priest Imhotep the Great, son of Ptah, had made, end quote. Oh, juicy. Am I? It's also really humid here, so thank you. These quotations bring to mind the allusion to the ancient book, which was believed to have descended from the sky to the north of Memphis. It appears as though this book, which might have survived in the memory only, might have been incorporated in one of the drafts established according to the original version and used as the starting point in drawing the plans of the historical temples. This suggestion accords with what the two quotations from the Edfu building text reveal. They point definitely to Lower Egypt as the place of the prototype constructions, which were imitated at a later date in Upper Egypt. Moreover, they refer to yet another sacred book, which is said to have contained drafts of ground plans of the temples. We cannot maintain the identity of these two sacred books, since the second book, the book for the planning of the temple, is described as being from historical times and the authorship is attributed to Imhotep. It is possible that the second book was regarded as a later version of a sacred writing in which the description of the original sacred buildings was preserved. If we stress that the earlier, the mythical books, is described as having originated in a region to the north of Memphis, and the Book of Historical Times was believed to have been established by Imhotep, it follows that the historical Memphis adopted and modified the pattern of the sacred buildings as they might have been constructed from reeds during prehistoric times in cultist places belonging to the region which spread to the north from Memphis. Later, in the course of historical times, the ground plans of the early structures might have been elaborated to the stage which is known to us from the architecture of the Archaic period and from the Old Kingdom. The same plans then constituted the essential pattern of the building of the temples in historical times. The tradition looked upon them as on the work of Imhotep. The evidence from the Edfu text propounds the view that the fundamental structure of the historical temple reenacted the type of the early Memphite temples. The Edfu textual evidence is not the only material of its kind. The inscriptions of the temple at Dendera, too, or Dendera, I've heard both, right? Two, tell us that the temple was built according to an ancient book from the times of the Companions of Horus, which was also preserved at Memphis. Hence, there is no doubt that the later constructions of Greco-Roman times preserved and restored the original native type of sacred building. Further illustration of the theory that the relationship between the historical temple and its mythical ancestor was not a mere tradition, but was based on real facts, can be found in general descriptions of the temple at Edfu. The organization of the actual temple reflects the physical appearance of its ancestor temple. The overall dimensions of the historical temple were equal to those of its prototype. In other words, they were set up according to the ground plans of the ancient constructions of reeds. The overall dimensions of the Edfu temple were 90 by 110 cubits. This enclosure measured 300 by 400 cubits. These measurements fit the descriptions of the first solar temple and also agree with the dimensions of the temple in Wetchesset-Neder. It follows that the original nucleus of the Edfu temple built within the outer brick enclosure wall seems to reflect the physical appearance of the first unit of the solar temple, and probably the original nucleus at Edfu imitates the aspect of the inner construction of the temple in Wetchesset-Neder. We know also from the cosmogonical records that the solar temple, in the final stage of its development, represented an entity of 240 by 90 cubits, and that this complex was built within an outer enclosure of 300 by 400 cubits. The Edfu enclosure was also 240 by 90 cubits. At Edfu, of these 240 cubits, 110 cubits are occupied by the long side of the original nucleus. 90 cubits comprise the long side of the forecourt, and 20 cubits represent the side dimension of the pylon. When this general division of the Edfu temple is compared to the overall aspect of the ground plan of the solar temple, we can here see definite points of contact. It looks as though the ground plan of the Edfu temple follows the pattern of the early construction, but in an opposite direction. In the organization of the solar temple, the first unit was a sanctuary of 90 by 20 cubits. Let's see, I'll show you guys some pictures of this too. The solar temple. So this is a depiction of all that stuff that I was just talking about. Is it in? Yeah, it's all in. So wait, that's the third stage. So wait. And then this is so this is the first and the second stages. Okay, we'll do this one first. And then I love rocks and trees and mushrooms too. just lost my spot. Did I just find it again? I hope so. Dendera. I think I went right back to it. Okay. I know the full moon, right? It's raining. It's pouring cats and dogs out there. I don't think I'm going to get out there for my stones tonight. Dang. Right. 1111. It just said 1111 on the top of the screen. Okay, cool. I like catching that. All right. 90 cubits, all that stuff. Okay, so yeah. So this would seem to correspond to the ground plan in which the pylon was erected. The second unit, the courtyard, would then correspond to the forecourt at Edfu. The original nucleus would then reenact the third unit of the mythical temple of the sun god. We know also that the solar temple was constructed in 3 successive phases. The building of the Edfu temple, too, was effected in 3 phases. The building texts of the Edfu temple indicate that this temple as an entity consisted in the main of 2 units. The original nucleus, or the great seat, which was framed within an enclosure forming thus a forecourt at its front and an ambulatory around the main part of the temple. The original nucleus was the principal residence of the falcon. In the descriptions of this part of the temple, the back central sanctuary is always named in the first place of the description. This circumstance and the position of the sanctuary within the temple reminds of the importance which the back central sanctuary had in the development of the mythical temple in Wetchesset Nader. The position of the sanctuary accords with what we know about the most sacred part of the primitive sacred enclosures of the archaic period, which we find represented on the seals of that period. There is at Edfu a large court at the front of this back central sanctuary, which was filled with several cultist rooms along the 2 side walls, and of the 2 side walls, in the midst of which was placed the Adaton. Balls, I want to look that word up. I want to see if it lets me yet. Adaton. You can do it. Please. Fine. This site can't be reached. Diagnosing the problem. Okay, whatever. If anybody knows what Adaton means, feel free to share. With the exception of all the subsidiary cultist chambers, the general layout of this part of the temple resembles the ground plan of the temple in Wetchesset Nader. Moreover, there are at Edfu, at the south end of the court, 2 halls, just as there are in the organization of the mythical prototype. Although differences can be noticed in the detailed dimensions of the individual parts of the mythical temple in Wetchesset Nader and those of the temple at Edfu, it seems possible that the setup of the former might have been used as a starting point for the ground plan of the original nucleus of the Edfu temple. In the history of the building of the Edfu temple, the construction of this unit represented the first phase. Excuse me, let me take a sip. Oh my gosh, it's getting so thin back here. There's not much left to read, right? That's cool. That's cool, Emoji King. Soapstone. I don't know soapstone. Can you take a shower with it? Does it lather? I know there's soap leaves. Ooh, my knee just popped. That was great. In addition, during the second phase of the building of the Edfu temple, the pronaos was erected at the front of the original nucleus. The pronaos at Edfu was the place where the creator, Tannin, and all the deities engaged in the creation of the mythical temples were believed to rest. The date of its foundation and its function in the organization of the temple appear to reenact the significance of the mythical temple of Misnet. At the end, during the third phase of the building, there were erected the forecourt and the enclosure, which formed an ambulatory around the original structure. It is known from the Edfu text solar temple. The analysis of the physical aspect of the temple at Edfu shows clearly that the organization of the temple was deliberately made and was not an incidental one. Seeing the points of contact between the organization of the historical temple and that of some early constructions, made most probably of reeds and some other light material, we may assume that at Edfu we have a definite attempt to preserve the physical appearance of the original native constructions. It is tempting to think that perhaps in this way the tradition of the Edfu temple expressed. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it let me back. Dang, dudes. I'm so close to the end. Can you hear me? I just pulled my phone out to like text you guys. Oh my gosh. Oh, hey. I can't believe it let me back. It did. Dang, okay. Dude. Awesome. Yay. Okay, good. There's like one page left in this chapter, and then there's just like the appendix, right? So wait, where am I? That really distracted me. A reenactment of the ancestral temple. Okay, wait. Sun god, mythical solar, Misnet. So, in fact, a reenactment of the textual evidence of the building texts seems to indicate that the Edfu temple, as a physical entity, was believed to enshrine two distinct units, which primarily were conceived as being of a mythical nature. Each of these represented the natural outcome of various mythical events which were believed to have happened in a particular era of the mythical age of the gods. In the organization of the temple at Edfu, we have on the site of one single temple the imitation of the earliest temple in which the falcon was believed to have been adored first. In the actual temple, The reenactment of the early shrine and the enclosure of the falcon assumed the function of the most sacred part of the temple. It was the principal place of worship of Horus in historical times. In the same temple, there is a reflection of the sacred enclosure, which was believed to have acted as one of the early places of worship of the sun god. We can therefore see a close link between the principle that governed the organization of the temple at Edfu and the essential ideas enshrined in the cosmogonical records. It is evident that the setup of the historical temple, which associates two originally separate units, was deliberate. The Edfu tradition seems to claim that the temple of Horus, the Betatite, was not only a symbolical revivification of the temple in Wetchesset Neter, but also its real likeness on the earth. It was the concrete form of the house fashioned as the protection of the falcon who consorted with the soul of the creator. In its own history, the actual temple reflects the phases of the creation of the first house of the god. I think that I read that other paragraph. Reenactment, the main part of the mythical solar temple. I think I'm gonna like what is I'm like Tarantinoing this right now. I'm gonna read that and then I'm gonna go back to where I am. The analysis of the physical aspect of the temple at Edfu shows clearly that the organization of the temple was deliberately made and was not an incidental one. Seeing the points of contact between the organization of the historical temple and that of some early constructions, made most probably of reeds and some other light material, we may assume that at Edfu we have a definite attempt to preserve the physical appearance of the original native constructions. It is tempting to think that perhaps in this way, the tradition of the Edfu temple expressed the idea that this temple was not only a symbolical revivification of its mythical ancestor temple or temples, it was in fact a factual reenactment of the ancestral temples. I think I did read it, but just in case it got cut off, now it's in there. Okay, then fast forward past all of that huge one that I just read. The inscriptions engraved on the prominent architectural parts of the temple, especially those which are on the sub-basement, Soubasement, sub-basement, especially those which are on the sub-basement, constitute a valuable set of records which enable us to illustrate in great detail the history and organization, as well as the significance and functions of the actual temple. A large book could be, or rather, a large book could be written on the basis of these documents. In our study, we have sketched merely the barest outlines of the history of the actual temple. We do not enter into details of the organization of the historical temple, since a proper study of the physical aspect and significance of the temple at Edfu is planned to be published later. Dude, I wonder if it was because I've looked for just even the texts of Edfu, and I could only find like a coffee table book with like a bunch of really cool pictures in it. Not the actual texts. The records referring to the history of the actual temple at Edfu claim that the ideas that lie behind the constitution of the mythical temples are decisive moments in the history, the foundation, and the building of the actual temple. We know from the myth that when Horus settled in his primeval domains together with Tannin, Re joined them. After the enemy of the god was overthrown, then a settlement was Dang, dudes. Bummer is that this keeps happening, but I'm determined to finish this. I might end up just rereading the last chapter again, but maybe not. So let's see here. We know from the myth that when Horus settled in his primeval domains together with Tannin, Re joined them. After the enemy of the god was overthrown, then a settlement was made for Re near an earlier mansion of the gods. These events appear to be decisive points in the history of the actual temple. They seem to underlie the principles of its organization. The main part of the Edfu temple represents the temple proper of the falcon Horus. When this one was completed, near to it a cultist place of the sun god was founded. This may explain why the Edfu temple, as a whole, represented two distinct sacred units. We find in the texts of the foundation ritual, recorded side by side, the name of Wetchesatniner and that of the great seat of Re. The historical temple, therefore, would concretize, is that how you say that? Concretize, in its physical appearance, that which had happened beyond the limits of historical times. It embodies in its existence the history of the sacred domains of the primeval age. It reenacts the aspects of the far distant mythical abodes of the gods. In this way, the late temples of Greco-Roman Egypt, in particular the Edfu temple, offer valuable evidence of the aspect and nature of the old native structures from pre-dynastic times. The traditions and beliefs attached to the early sacred places of Egypt constitute the mythological history of the actual historical temple. The Edfu temple was not only in its symbolical significance, but also in its real appearance, the original temple at the beginning of the world, the Wetchesatniter of the sanctified God, the seat of the eldest one of the gods. Boom! Is it still frozen for you guys? Is it been frozen this whole time I'm talking? Oh no, I hope not. And the only thing left is the appendix, which I'm going to attempt. Bear with me if you're feeling it, man, or lady, or whoever. Is it frozen? No, I think now I've got 2 bars. I hope it's live. I hope it's live right now. Okay. Appendix, an outline history of the Egyptian temple. This is only like 3 or 4 pages, right? The starting point of this study has been a group of texts, most of them in the interfaces of the enclosure wall of the Ptolemaic temple at Edfu, which on closer examination proved to be cosmogonical texts dealing with the creation of the earth and the origin of sacred places. The information obtained from this group has been in part repeated and in part supplemented by a number of other inscriptions from other parts of the Edfu temple. As a whole, the texts are probably the most difficult and obscure in the whole field of Egyptology, and have never previously been studied. Many of the facts and ideas that they reveal have been hitherto unknown. The Edfu records, as a whole, are a valuable sourcebook for the history of the Egyptian temple. They present us with a coherent account of the creation of the earth, in which is projected the history of the Egyptian temple. It has been noticed that this theory of creation makes a distinct difference between the creation of the earth and that of the rest of the world. The creation of the earth, however, is interpreted as proceeding step by step with the development of sacred domains. The Egyptian theory evidently was that at the end of each of the succeeding phases, the creation of the earth, a sacred domain originated. We have seen that this creation theory alludes to 2 distinct phases of the primeval age, and that it was only in the second phase that the sacred domains that survived in historical times had originated. Awesome, thank you. The texts studied describe, in the first instance, how a primeval island emerged from the primeval waters. This island, in a way, and for reasons unknown, disappeared. When it reemerged and its life was renewed, new land began to form along its margins, and it was on these lands, called paylands, that the temple came into existence. The muddy island in the midst of Nun, Nun, therefore, was the original nucleus of the world of the gods. In it was the seat of the Creator and the homeland of the primeval ones. The other creative powers. This is described as a definite, though primitive, cultist place. As to the aspect of the Creator's resting place, the Edfu records refer to four traditions. Excuse me. Allusion is made to the pool with the lotus, or the field of reeds with the deity pillar, or the elementary mansion, or the final place, or finally the place of the willow. This first sacred domain was destroyed, and darkness descended on the primeval world of the creators. It was revivified, and as a land of ancestral tradition, the original island assumed the function of a foundation ground for a new sacred domain from which the succeeding phases of the creation of the earth emanated. The second sacred domain in the original island had as its center the perch, a slip of reed in essence, which is said to be the principal instrument by which the sacred nature of the island was renewed. The creation of the sacred domain at the beginning of the second phase of the primeval island started on the territory of the ancestors. We are acquainted with three types of sacred places of the ancestors in which, two, the cult of the new divine generation took origin. These are the SBHT enclosure around the perch and the HW mansion, and the SBTY enclosure around the willow. The origin of these three enclosures, which could not be anything more than mere fences of light material enshrining a primitive resting place of the god, is traced to the sacred place where the falcon is said to be the first deity to be adored. The creation of these primitive sacred domains was, in fact, a resurrection and restoration of what had been in the past, but had vanished. And each of these three acts of recreation of a former state resulted in a period of creation of new lands, the Paylands. These Paylands, adjacent to the original island, were the vital element in the creation of the sacred domains of the falcon in the primeval age. They were primarily the realm of the dead deity, the Ka, and emerged after a magical rite of creation was performed on the edges of the island. The earliest part of their history is, in fact, a repetition and reenactment of what was done in the ancestral domain. The erection of the seat of the god, which here, too, was the perch and was set up on the marginal land of the Payland. On the marginal land of the Payland, once more the magical rite of creation was performed and bore out of Nun the surroundings of the perch. This small area was of special significance. This was the home of the Ka, and this land became the foundation ground for the first enclosure of the falcon, in which the temple evolved later on. Thus, the perch within a simple enclosure represents the elementary aspect of the first mansion of the falcon. Thereafter, yet another phase of creation of lands followed, and in these lands, the HWT enclosures were constructed as the earliest type of sacred building. In the same lands, a new type of enclosure, INB, originated after a certain part of these paylands containing the first place was liberated from the enemy. In the erection of these simple enclosures from reed around a primitive resting place of the god, a distinctive phase in the development of sacred domains was reached. It is demonstrated that each of the two rows of the paylands had its own type of sacred enclosure. Our sources speak of the origin of two types of temple, the temple of the falcon and the temple of the sun god. Of these, the temple of the falcon was the earlier, and was clearly regarded as the final and culminating act of the whole process of creation. This temple was a natural event. It originated that was erected to protect the perch on the water's edges on which the falcon settled down. This shelter was the most sacred part of the elementary enclosure of the falcon, and for this reason, it was the first sanctuary of the primitive temple, which is described in detail and whose precise measurements are given. This temple was oriented from north to south and was, in its elementary aspect, nothing more than a courtyard open to the sky and having one single sanctuary at its north rear wall. Then other cultist rooms were added off the south wall of this enclosure. And finally, this complex was surrounded by yet another greater enclosure. A temple of this aspect reflects a degree. It reflects a degree of development which was undoubtedly reached before the opening of historical times. A temple of this type was probably constructed in many places of pre-dynastic Egypt. The origin and growth of the Temple of the Falcon constitutes the complete history of the first temple complex and illustrates the essential condition and nature of an Egyptian temple. The starting point in the creation of the second type of temple was the I&B enclosure surrounding the ground on which the temple evolved later on. This is the temple of the sun god, which was founded after creation had been completed. It was an artificial and somewhat arbitrary work, not showing points of contact with the natural growth of the Temple of the Falcon, being rather of a more advanced and sophisticated type. It, too, is described in some detail, and its dimensions are given. This type of temple was, in its beginnings, a single rectangular sanctuary erected in the midst of a vast enclosure to the south of which a courtyard was made. Along the sides of this courtyard, other chambers and halls were created. Then yet another much bigger courtyard was made to the south of the already existing structure. Subsequently, this complex was surrounded by a wall forming an ambulatory around these two courtyards. Our documents seem to allude to yet another much simpler type of temple, said to be also that of the sun god. This consisted of a single enclosure enshrining one sanctuary only. At a somewhat later date, a pronaos was erected at the south end of this enclosure. These types of enclosures and primitive temples seem to reflect the development of sacred structures in a single region, which, for this reason, may well be regarded as the homeland of the temple. The temples of this homeland seem to represent the starting point in the history of the actual temples in Egypt. A very brief survey was made of our present knowledge of early temples in Egypt. There are no primitive temples known that preserve the precise form and dimensions of the mythical temples of the Edfu records, but it is demonstrated that there are numerous points of contact and resemblances, and that, perhaps surprisingly, there appear to be definite links with the archaic cemetery in Saqqara. The Edfu narrative acquaints us equally with the tradition according to which the site of the first temple was believed to have been chosen. The site of this temple was in a land which was sacred by its nature, and in which was the gift of a defunct deity. In contrast, the site of the later temples was a battlefield. The traditions and beliefs attached to the Temple of the Falcon make it clear that it was believed that at the beginning of the world there was one sole temple, and this temple evolved from the necessity to protect the successor of the creator. Its construction derived from the bequest of the defunct deity. The principal consequences of these facts, beliefs, and allusions are that, first, the historical temple in Egypt is regarded as the direct descendant of a primeval temple that was erected on a low mound near the island in which the drama of creation commenced. There could, of course, have been only one such original place. Every cultist place took this myth of creation and adapted it to local needs, and thus every temple in Egypt appears to have claimed to be the original place of the creation of the earth. Secondly, the temple was regarded as a living entity. We are already familiar with the ideas of the temple and its beliefs being animated, but it appears that there was more than mere animation. Reasons are cited for suggesting that the temple was conceived as the material embodiment of the god of the temple, who attained concrete form in the temple, and who was the son of the earth. Thirdly, and in some way most important, there can be no doubt that the traditions concerning the origin of the temple are basically Memphite in origin, adopted and adapted for each local temple, and probably they originated and were first formulated at the beginning of the Archaic period. The history of the temple is presented as forming only a part of a much wider doctrine of the creation of the earth. Therefore, the ideas that govern the form, origin, nature, and significance of the normal cultist place and the temple are Memphite, deriving from the Memphite cosmogonical doctrine, just as the formative ideas behind the daily temple ritual are Heliopolitan. Boom. The end. So I'll flash these figures up for anybody who wants to check them out. Primitive enclosures. The bull. The falcon. More primitive enclosures. Primitive enclosure of the falcon, third stage. First stage. Final stage. I hope that these aren't fuzzy. They're clear on my screen. Okay, solar temple, first stage. Solar temple, second stage. Third stage. Fourth stage. And then the second type of solar temple. Is it all in? Yeah, it's all in. So dang, all right. That's it. We did it. Even with all the cutting out. Thanks for hanging out with me, girls and gentlemen. But to the end, my friends. Wow, what a juicy read. I mean, yeah, it's like creation stories that we read. It's like the Bible and the Aztec story and the Greek stories. It has a lot of the same symbolism and it's so juicy. So dudes, thanks for doing this with me. Whoever, whenever you find this, I appreciate you. Thanks for bearing with. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And I intend to come back again tomorrow with either another chapter of The Path of Alchemy or a brand new book. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how we're feeling. So thank you so much. Thank you, YouTube. Thank you, StreamYard. Thank you, everyone here with me tonight and whoever comes at any point. I thank you, my family, my parents, my sister, my friends. I thank you above all, Spirit. Thank you, God. And I will see you all very soon. Mwah! Until then, take care of yourselves. Thank you.